If you always say yes, people will always ask. If you say no and explain why not, the customer will start to understand that you can't get everything.
What has been the biggest learning curve for you when moving from consulting to true solution architecture?
The biggest learning curve has been delegation, the ability to say, I don't have time to do this right now. When becoming a solution architect, you cannot do everything by yourself.
You really love taking on challenging projects, almost rescuing them. What are some of the most common reasons that business app implementations fail?
If a project needs to be rescued, that customer's unhappy. It's rewarding to be able to take something that's not going well and make a success of it. The most common reasons that business apps implementations fail is...
Hey, welcome to this week's episode of Power Talks. My name is Griffin, the host of the Citizen Developer Channel and Power Talks series. And today I'm joined by special guest Stuart Baxter. Stuart, thank you so much for being here. I want to ask you, what has been like the biggest learning curve for you in terms of like when moving from consulting and being a consultant to true solution architecture?
For me, the biggest learning curve has been delegation, not delegation like in Canvas apps, the ability to say, actually, I don't have time to do this right now. But within our team, we have a person over here who's really good at this. It might be, for example, building an ERD. Early on in a project, yes, you could do it yourself, but you're being pulled into every possible meeting. Being able to delegate and say to someone within the team who's good at that, or even someone who's learning that, you take this, you build this, and I'll give you some support on it. And what that's allowed me to do is be able to spend time in the necessary meetings when a project is ramping up and really focus my time on what really needs to be done to build that solution. And I think that's been a steep learning curve for me. Initially, I worked with a lot of small partners, and those small partners, there isn't 20 resources on a project. There's one, maybe two. So you get used to doing everything, and the reality is when becoming a solution architect, you cannot do everything by yourself.
Yeah. No, I think that's super insightful, and I almost even hear what you're saying and take it a little bit differently, at least for myself, where I feel like I say yes a lot in the sense that, like, the thing that I'm learning the most is that I don't say yes a lot as in, like, I can do it, but maybe, like, the team can do it, in that I tend to, like, throw out this term called scope, when it comes to making the client happy. And I feel like it's in a similar vein, like you have to understand how to say no, like how to either say, I can't take that on, or, hey, this is a really cool feature, but, it's really not in, our contract or statement of work, or, something we're going to be able to do by this time that you want it. So I think that's really interesting. I don't know if you have an experience. Is there a story there you feel like this learning curve, and if you'd be willing to share of like where you feel like maybe overcommitting yourself or not delegating very well, like kind of bit you a little bit, and you've learned that lesson?
Yeah. So relatively early on in my career, my first kind of solution architecture role was with a really, really small partner, and the customer was on a fixed price. They knew they were on a fixed price, and they like to push boundaries, we'll say. And there was quite a lot of scope creep in that project. And when we got to kind of 2 or 3 sprints in and started planning the whole 3 sprints ahead, we realised pretty quickly that we had round about 200 points of capacity in the project and round about 600 points of demand in the project. And it was like, yeah, we can deliver a third of what you want. We need to start saying no here. And initially, yeah, it was challenging. You worry about saying, no, we can't do that, and you worry about upsetting the customer or damaging the relationship. And at first, I was terrified. I was thinking, I'm going to have to disappoint this customer, and they're not going to get what they want, and they're not going to be happy. And the first time they were a bit, oh, you can't do that. Okay. And then 2 or 3 times later, they're like, oh, okay, we understand why you can't do that now. and we understand that we have these things that are fundamental to the system operating. So actually it's okay if we don't have this little extra thing because it's not fundamental, but we'll always ask. And that's a lesson I learned really, really quickly. If you always say yes, people will always ask. If you say no and explain why not, then that does take away some of those conversations. The customer or the team will start to understand that you can't get everything. And when they come to you with a new requirement, it's in more cases a genuine, we need to have this and something has slipped the net here. And you can have that conversation around, okay, if we are going to deliver this feature, something else needs to come out. And more often than not, that's things like sending chasers to people when they haven't taken an action. Let's
Yeah.
take that out because realistically, most people are doing it first time. Or building an over the top report that 3 people look at once a month. Let's build them a view instead. They can use that view. They could even, heaven forbid, export to Excel and put some nice graphs over the top of it or connect it to Power BI themselves. And
Yeah.
there's always things that can come out of a project if something crucial does come to the forefront and really needs to happen.
Yeah. No, I think that's really insightful in that there's finding the right time to push back, and that there's gonna be maybe not gaps, but like little things that we're not gonna be able to automate their entire job. Like they're still going to have to do certain things, or click around in the system and maybe update different records and whatnot. So I think that's interesting. I really want to kind of ask this next question in that you really love taking on challenging projects, specifically like almost rescuing them. And I wanted to ask you why, first off. And I also wanted to ask you, what are some of the most common reasons that business app implementations fail?
So I'll answer the second part of that first. So I believe the most common reasons that business apps implementations fail is a breakdown of communication between the customer and the people building, whether that's an internal team or it's a group of consultants or whatever that may be. In order for a project to succeed, there needs to be a trust and there needs to be honesty. So going back to the example of what's in scope, what's out of scope, if everything is a P1 or a priority 1 in your backlog, then nothing is actually that
Nothing
important.
is, yeah.
Building up that trust and that honesty really early on and saying, look, what is genuinely the most important things to make this succeed and focusing on them. If you can get that right, your project will succeed. If you don't take the time to understand what that is, your project will probably fail. You might be spending a third of the project focusing on a really over the top UX. If that's not what's important to the customer, you're wasting your time. And in terms
Yeah.
of why I like to take on rescue projects, in a nutshell, I like to make people happy. Generally speaking, if a project needs to be rescued, that customer's unhappy. They're not having the best time. And it's rewarding to be able to take something that's not going well and make a success of it.
Oh. No, I think there's something to be said about that. And I mean, I will say, I feel like I've been on really good projects and not so good learning opportunity projects. And I think there's something really nice about being on, a project where everyone's kind of rock stars and it feels like it runs too smoothly, Um, but I also think, and I don't think this is a hot take, but I also think I learned a lot on my difficult projects. Like really was given a ton of opportunities to like really learn and figure out, okay, why did maybe this fail? Why did this meeting not go very well? Why did the client really not, like this? Or why is this thing happening? And I feel like that those I think it's interesting that you also talk about how really getting into those sort of projects can be particularly rewarding. Is there another story time here? Do you have like a memorable turnaround story for maybe a project that you took on that was failing and helped make it successful?
So there's a project I worked on with a healthcare customer. Um, Basically, the premise of the solution was children can be vaccinated in schools, and part of that is a consent process. So the consent form goes out to the parents. Parents say, yes, I would like my child to be vaccinated. That feeds back into Dataverse, creates a bunch of views and a bunch of different things on the back of that. And then in the end, the child's vaccinated. When I took on the project, it had about 65 data tables, of which about a third were useful. It had around 200 flows, and it had a whole bunch of JavaScript that was just unnecessary. The JavaScript was doing really simple things like, for example, showing and hiding fields. That could be a business rule. So we really stripped this back and said, okay, forgetting about what we have, what do we need? And it was established really quickly that we didn't need half of what was there. There was, for example, a process that when a consent is submitted, it generates a PDF. That PDF is only looked at by one person, and it's only looked at once a month, and they take a sample of them. So we were producing 250,000 PDF documents a month, and about 50 of them were being looked at once a quarter. As you can imagine, the effort involved in processing the consent, making it look nice in the PDF, etc., it was well over the top. And to turn that around, we effectively stripped that back. That took away a whole load of actions being used by Power Automate, so a lot less throttling. And we produced a button that they could click that would create them a PDF. So when they wanted their sample of 5 to 10 of them a month or whatever they needed, they would pick 5 to 10 a month, press the button. Yes, it's more effort to press the button than just have it there and open it up, but for the volume we were talking, it was minimal.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting when we got towards the end of this. I had a conversation with the product owner within the business, and it kind of took me back when I really thought about it. She was like, I appreciate this has been difficult the last few months, but the thing that we need to consider with this is what we have done here is help 250,000 children. And that took a second to sink in, but it was like, yep, that was worth it. So it
Yeah.
was really nice to be involved in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of jealous. I think that is such a cool opportunity in that I've had another guest previously as well that had worked on an app that was for some kind of government agency, and their mom actually used the app that they had built, and I was like, that's kind of a cool kind of fun circle moment. But a lot of what they were talking about was how like it just really was really, I don't know if fulfilling would be the right word, but it was so cool. It was rewarding. That's, I guess, the word kind of you were using, and that I'm thinking about. It's like super rewarding, and you're right. I think that's so cool. I'm fascinated at how easy it is for us to overcomplicate solutions. And like what you're saying, and that there was all of this stuff that was built, and I'm sure dollars that were spent and hours that were spent building all of these pieces. And I'm fascinated at how maybe, somebody else coming into the solution and getting a fresh set of eyes or whatever is able to like, or maybe it's just simply, you're probably too humble to admit this. Maybe it's just you were more knowledgeable than the people that were on the project at the time. But like something about you allowed you to come into that project and just say like, whoa. We could give them more value with less components in less time, Like I don't know, something just about that concept is like fascinating to me. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that and why we tend to like over engineer solutions.
So there's two things come into play. So the first one for me is fun, quite honestly. Um, you can build a business rule in 10 minutes. There's nothing interesting about it. There's nothing exciting about it. And every so often we need to do something fun. And I think that's okay in certain scenarios to kind of flex those muscles and do something really interesting. But sometimes what you need isn't interesting. That's the first thing I want to take away from this. And the second thing is that sometimes when you go through a kind of iterative development cycle, you will find stuff that you don't need anymore, or stuff that can be done differently, or things that can be achieved with a flow instead of a plugin, or vice versa. And it's really, really, really important to fully remove what you had before. If you find a better approach for something, use it, but don't leave behind half of the old approach. And that's when things become over-engineered, where you have one change on a table that's triggering 6 different flows. Right? Well, why do you need that? Have one flow with 6 branches, problem solved. It's one flow, it's one thing that could go wrong, it's one thing that could be updated, and it's simple. And the way I like to build out solutions is keep in the back of my mind someone else will have to look at this at some point, and what are they going to think of me as an individual and the business I work for at that point when they see my name and that business's name attached to it. If they look at it and think this is a mess, I failed myself and I failed the business I'm working for, and more importantly, I failed the customer. I think keeping that in the back of my mind is what keeps me level-headed with these things.
Hey, if you are finding this video impactful or insightful, be sure to like and subscribe. But more importantly, if you are wanting to learn more about the Microsoft Power Platform, then you are going to want to check out the completely free self-paced course that has all of the hand-picked content directly from me as the first link down in the description down below. This is going to teach you everything you need to know about the Power Platform to get started and pass your first few Microsoft certifications. I can honestly say that as a Power Platform consultant myself, that I love what I do, and I don't think many people in today's day and age can say that. If you are wanting to learn more, as I mentioned, be sure to check out the first link in the description down below to get in direct contact and connect with me. All right, let's get back to the conversation. Do you feel like, how do you also have those conversations with the business of like, hey, I know you just spent all this money and time on this solution. We need to scrap a lot of it. Like, how do you have that sort of conversation without getting thrown out by the back of your shirt collar, and like getting tossed out and not upsetting them in a way? Like, that's kind of what I'm thinking. I'm thinking if somebody comes in here and tells me that we need to, like, how do you navigate that conversation, I guess, is ultimately what I'm trying to ask you and get at.
So generally speaking, when I'm brought into these kind of projects, something drastic has gone wrong. Like, no one is changing partners or changing teams because everything is great. Otherwise, they'd stay with what they had. And in a way, that makes it easier to approach that conversation. It's important not to say what this other person or team has built is rubbish, because that's not fair. There will always be something in there, or something that made sense at the time based on what they knew and so on. But for me, it's around having an honest reflection on what is there. Initially forgetting about how people might feel. Put that to one side for the moment and just have an honest look at what's there, why it's there, and what needs to change. Then, of course, you want to soften things up before actually having the conversation and saying, look, this isn't right here. More often than not, you'll find similar patterns. So, for example, the JavaScript example I gave, where you had lots of JavaScript that should have been business rules and it was overcomplicated and things. That particular form wasn't displaying what it should at the right times. So it was quite easy to say, actually, we've got this, we've identified the problem, we know the solution, we can fix this relatively quickly, but you also have 8 or 9 other examples of this pattern within your system that, in order to prevent this happening there, we can do this. We can strip out this JavaScript and replace it with out-of-the-box business rules. And being able to lump things together and say, look, here are groups of this issue. Generally, as I say, when they've come to you, there is an issue, there is a problem, and no one wants the same problem twice. Being able to say, look, we'll solve this 8 times for you. They're like, great, here's a check, take the money, go and fix it.
Yeah. Do you have like a framework, or is this like an art or a science of being able to understand what the problems are, what like 'cause I'm trying to think like you're coming into a this system with all these different pieces and JavaScript and all this stuff that you're saying, all these flows. How do you decipher what needs to stay and what needs to go and what needs to be replaced? Like I guess back to my original statement. Like is this an art? Is this a science? What is kind of your framework on how you do that?
I don't think it's either an art or a science, if I'm honest. I think it's guessing at first. Like, I'll be quite honest around that. Like, 90% of debugging when you first start out is guessing. And it's knowing the different areas of the system that could be causing this. So, for example, a form that's not displaying a field when it should, that's probably a business rule. If it's not a business rule, it's probably JavaScript. Being able to take that step back and say, okay, what is going wrong? I think that's the most important thing. Forgetting why it's gone wrong, how it's gone wrong, when it's gone wrong. What is it that's wrong here? So, example, I've ticked this box here to say my answer isn't listed and I'm expecting a text box underneath. That text box isn't there. Really boiling it down and saying, okay, tell me how this happens and what should happen. Then being able to dive into why it's going wrong. And then lastly, how do we fix it? So taking that step right back and saying, okay, this is what's meant to happen. This is what is happening. This is what's supposed to happen. How do I make that happen? Is it turning off this business rule and replacing it? Is it removing this JavaScript? Are there two things conflicting with each other? Which is quite often the case with kind of form-based logic where one thing says yes, one thing says no, and the system says, I don't know, and does nothing. And I think that's my formula for figuring these out. I appreciate it's quite a simple answer, but it really does vary from project to project. Like that could be a 10-minute light bulb moment, or it could be 2 weeks of banging your head against a wall, panicking and going, why is this doing this? Before speaking to a junior who goes, what about that? Which I have had happen before actually on a large scale government organisation. We had a junior QA who was shadowing calls, literally never worked in the business before, right out of university, and she sat very, very quietly for a long time on a call where there's lots of people shouting at each other, millions of pounds worth of salaries, and she waited for a pause, put her hand up on Teams and said, on the fourth line that C should be uppercase. And a whole room went, where? No, it shouldn't. No, it can't be that. And she's like, yes, it is. Because that's lowercase there and everywhere else it's uppercase. Your variable's the wrong case. And she was an absolute hero that day. And she was right. And sometimes just that fresh pair of eyes saying, okay, explain this to me, almost that rubber ducking theory that they have. Not sure if you've heard this theory before. When you're debugging, try explaining it to someone. That could be a colleague. If your colleagues are all busy, explain it to a rubber duck. And it's a theory that's been going around for a long time now. And she happened to be the rubber duck that day who heard the explanation and went, that's not right.
Yeah. I think that's Man, I think that's also such a super cool and just full circle story. I want to ask you maybe a little bit of a switch up of a question, but maybe not. Like what skills separate great solution architects from others? And I don't know if you have one skill or a whole host of skills here, but what are these lists, these things, these like measurable difference makers in great architects?
I think the biggest thing for me is being comfortable that you don't know everything and being able to take that step back and say, look, I don't know, but I will find out. And being surrounded by a whole bunch of architects where I am now, there's people with varying skill sets. Some people are really, really great with Canvas apps. Some people are really great with Azure Functions. The most important thing is knowing who knows the answer, not knowing the answer. And having that ability to step back and say, look, I don't know, but I know someone who does. Or I know somewhere I can go and find out, or some reference architecture that I can look up and see how this might work. And I think that mindset of it's fine to not know is something that sets apart great solution architects and great consultants, to be honest. Like we touched on earlier on, it's easy to say yes to everything, and before you know it, you've got 600 points worth of effort and 200 points worth of capacity. But it's slightly more difficult to just step back and say, look, I don't know, but I can find out.
Yeah. What is I also kind of think I feel like some people have also shared that they find that super important. And it's kind of that like that idea of being vulnerable and authentic and like if you sometimes say no or sometimes say I don't know, it makes your like I do knows like much more accredited. You know,
Mhm.
if you just always say that you know how to do everything or that you can do everything and then one time you're like, "Hey, actually I don't know. I you know, it's realized that you lied in some way, then the next
Mhm.
time you even if you do actually know the next thing, you know, there's this like shred of doubt, you know, on if you actually do. And I think that I think it's a lot easier said than done to tell people who are paying you for your expertise to look at them and say, I don't know. And and to do that and kind of you know and recognize that. But I don't know. I tried to. One of the first books I was told to read when I first started getting into consulting and the Power Platform was this book called Getting Naked, and that's kind of just the principle of it, of like, let's be real, let's not act like we are, you know, smarter or more, you know, more of an expert than we are, and let's just figure out how to get this done together and keep things moving. You know?
One thing I think is important to add to that as well is there is that vulnerability when you say, I don't know. But once you realize that actually you don't know, but the person asking you doesn't know either. So being able to, like, kind of empathizing with them and saying, look, I don't know how we solve this. I need some time, or I need to do some research, or I need to ask someone. Like you say, it builds that credibility. And it took a moment for it to kind of sink in with me that actually no one in this room knows the answer right now. And that's fine. That's why we're in this room effectively, to figure out the answer. And it's quite a powerful phrase, I don't know. When you mentioned around books as well, there's a really interesting book I read by Thomas Erickson quite recently. Thomas has a series of books loosely titled Idiots. They're absolutely fantastic. So the one I've read recently is called Surrounded by Idiots, and it's quite a tongue-in-cheek title, but the subject matter is really quite valuable in that it teaches you how to interact with people who are different from you. So there's the theory around colours where you have red people who are very, very quick and very upfront and very often short-tempered. And then you have your yellow playful people, your green people who care about people, and then your blue people who care about processes. And if you put someone who cares from a red perspective about getting stuff done really quickly in a room with someone who cares about people, you're going to have clashes. One person's going to be interested in just do it, and the other's like, what about people's feelings and what about how people think on this? And the book, as opposed to explaining how the colours work, It explains how the colours can and should work together, and it's been a really interesting kind of journey going through that and having those light bulb moments and going, oh, that's something that I do, and this clash that's being described is something I've experienced at some point in my career, whether it's me being involved or me on a call with two other people doing this, and it's really interesting to take that step back and say, actually, yeah, this that situation could have been different if we did what's described here.
Yeah. That's actually a really interesting point that I hadn't thought of, and you reminded me. I another like thing that I hadn't really known about or had heard of, kind of around that same time when I was getting into even just like working corporately, was this idea of emotional intelligence. And like I said, I had never really heard of it before, but had kind of been put onto a book and then another book and then another book, but just like reading about it. And something that I'm like realizing is just how few people I feel like are actually emotionally intelligent. And I don't say that to say, I have it all figured out and I'm surrounded by idiots. It's not what I'm saying at all. But I do sometimes like an example too. I have a good friend who's kind of a serial entrepreneur, and has been an entrepreneur his entire life, and he has a decent team, decent sized team, and I guess he was in this scenario where he had kind of dogged on someone on his team a little bit because they were just missing the mark. They weren't meeting the things that person and the company had committed to doing and whatever. And I can remember just like I'm having a conversation with him, and again, I'm no expert by any means, but it was even just a little example where it was like, well, how about did you ask him how his day was before? Like just like little things that like even something like that, and just like talking to him about it, and he's like, you know what, you're right. Like I am not good at this. I need to figure out how to be better at this and like see them as the person and not just like the thing that they missed or whatever. And he's a great guy. He's by no means a toxic boss, but in that scenario, it just reminded me kind of what you're saying. In that like really being able to, I don't know if empathize is the right word, but just like there's like it's bigger than communication. It's like this like ability to like really relate to the people that you are around, and especially on a project, and especially on projects that you're rescuing, like how much more important that is. And I feel like it's not very natural. I feel like people are really bad at it. I feel like I can get a lot better at it. And it's just something that I guess I've noticed as I've like continued to grow up and have more and more experience with different people that are different colors, like you're saying, red people and yellow people and green people and blue people, like just just dealing with that, I guess. So thank you for sharing. I think that's super interesting. Does that make any sense? Like what I'm saying? Am I just rambling right now? So
That makes sense. One of the other things that I'd like to share as well is a piece of advice I got really early on in my career, which was always ask why. And that can apply to the development side of things. So why do we think this is 8 points versus 2 points or 3 points or whatever it may be, but it could also apply to the scenario you described as well, where someone's just not hitting the mark. It could be that it's just a thing that they hate doing. So like I've had colleagues in the past who they are absolutely in their element if you ask them to build a complex model-driven form, for example. And they will smash that out the park every single time. They're relatively good at Canvas apps, but they just don't enjoy it. But over there's someone who really enjoys Canvas apps who just isn't that good at model-driven forms. And being able to step back and say, right, neither of these people are hitting the mark because they're not doing what they're good at. How about we do a switch and the person who's really good at Canvas apps and really loves Canvas apps does that, and our model-driven guy over there who's usually smashing it out the park with model-driven stuff, we'll give him that. And that simple switch there and That taking a step back and saying, right, why are these two people not performing at their best? And sometimes it is just as simple as they're just not having fun that day. And it's important to have fun with what you're doing. Obviously, not every single day can be really great fun, but if you do have that little opportunity to do something that you find fun, let's be honest, we're all a bit geeky when it comes to tech. If you can give someone their flavour of fun tech, that can really turn around their day, and the next thing that they get that's maybe not so enjoyable, they're already at the crest of the wave and enjoying themselves anyway, so it has that kind of knock-on effect and domino effect of actually it's fine, I'm giving you this thing, I know you don't like it, but there's some more fun stuff later on for you in the project, so bear with us and get through this. It will only take a couple of weeks or whatever it's going to take. I think
Yeah.
that's a really useful skill to have as well. Just why are we doing this, or why is this not working, or why do we need to scrap half a system and rebuild it?
Yeah. Man, well, thank you for sharing. I have one last topic I want to cover with you. So you are and so a switch up here, but you're a Microsoft MVP, and you co-founded the Scottish Power Platform user group. I I wanted to ask you, give you the floor a little bit, plug the user group, but also what impact did that not only have on the people that are a part of the group, but what sort of impact did co-founding that have on you?
So it's been really useful for me professionally and personally. Professionally, I get to learn from some really great people in the industry, and we have some fantastic speakers. We've had Keith Atherton on a few times, who I know you've met. We've had lots of people who've gone on to become MVPs. We've had Nathan Rose on from New Zealand, Hamish Shield as well. It's been great to meet people and learn from people that write all these great blogs and do all these great sessions that you just haven't had time to cross paths with yet. And on a personal level, it's really taught me about empathy as well. It's been interesting to see people come along to the group just as a participant at first, and they're very, very quiet and not really engaging with everyone in the room at first when they first settle in, and then seeing them getting chatting with people and getting to meet people and enjoying that whole networking experience. And we've also had a few who've gone on to be speakers for us as well, and go on to much bigger and better things, some of them becoming MVPs, for example. Or we had Anna Black on a few months ago, who spoke for us and then 12 days later spoke at Power Platform Conference in Vegas for thousands of people. And being able to be a tiny part in their journey is really, really rewarding. And it's really exciting to see the group continuing to grow and continuing to have those sort of regular faces. And it's almost like catching up one old friend when we have a meeting now, as opposed to a room full of strangers that we were kind of a year and a half, 2 years ago when we first started. And it's a really fun experience. Running the user group's one of my favourite things to do in the community, and I like to interact as well with other groups. So you've got, for example, the Power Platform High Fives group with Keith Atherton and Sarah Jones. You've got the UX UI Allies group that runs in the UK as well, with Kat Schneider and Charles Sexton and Anna Black. Um, we quite regularly refer people to them, they refer people to us, and so on as well. So it's interesting. There is no kind of rivalry. It's something that's kind of stood out in the Power Platform world for a long time now. People always want to help each other, whether that's consultants giving other consultants advice, or people sharing knowledge on blogs and sessions and things, or even user groups helping other user groups. It really is a fantastic community that we have here.
Yeah. What sort of impact has and maybe you were kind of touching on this, like how has this impacted you, and maybe how has even mentoring others helped you grow as a leader?
So in terms of mentoring and working with other people, I find there's always something that people are good at that sets them apart. So A little example, when we first met Anna is very, very, very good at the UX side of things. It's not necessarily something I'm bad at, but every time I see any of her content, I learn something. And there's people who are not necessarily massively known in the community and got 5 vlogs going out a month and so on, but everybody knows something cool. And I think working with mentors and things like that and figuring out what they know that's cool and learning from it, but also seeing the penny drop with them as well when they realise that thing that they know is actually something special or something different or something interesting, whether they go on to talk about it or they just take a little confidence boost going, yeah, that is actually quite cool and I knew that and you didn't. And it's really interesting to have those conversations and see people's faces when something unexpected comes up from an unexpected person. And you're like, oh, that is really cool. Why haven't I been doing that for years? Really great example. I can never remember what this button's called, but in model-driven apps, in the top left of a view, there's a button that shows you effectively your whole grid. It's like a quick reference panel or something it's called.
Okay.
I've been working in the Dynamics and Power Platform industry for 10 years, and I'd never noticed that button. And last month we had a session from a lady called Laura Walker, who had been coming along as a participant for months and months now. She presented her first session and a whole room full of people were like, where is this button? We need this button. And the look on her face when she saw a room full of people go, that is really, really cool. And we didn't know that. And in that room you had, I think, 6 or 7 MVPs. You had people who'd been in consulting for 25 years, people working with Dynamics for 10 years, and realizing actually she wasn't the most experienced person in the room, but she had something to give. And I think that's what I've taken away from all the kind of mentoring experiences I've had. It's giving people the confidence to talk about what they know, but also learning what they know that's often quite cool as well.
Yeah. Man, thank you, Stuart, man. Thank you so much for being here and just sharing everything that you're sharing. I feel like I need to listen back to this episode just for myself, and everything, all the little nuggets that you're sharing. I'd love to wrap up our episode by transitioning us to the after hours happy hour segment of the show. Last couple minutes here. I don't think it's a surprise that you are Scottish and live in Scotland and you love to travel and explore Scotland in particular. I love to travel as well, and I live in the United States, obviously. I have not been able to get to that half of the world. But what are like some of the slept on like best spots to go and explore around Scotland?
Um, Generally, the places you find by accident. So, a little example, there's an old graveyard up near where I live. It's about 25 miles away near St Andrews. St Andrews, of course, been very, very famous for golf and expensive hotels. And the church in the graveyard was built in I think the 1700s or something ridiculous like that. Very long time ago. And at the back of the church, there is a cliff face with like stone carvings. And you could very easily just walk past them and never notice they were there. It's not plastered all over the internet. It's not on TripAdvisor. It's not on these top 10 places to go. And it's those little places that no one thinks about and no one knows about. And the other thing that I find that's really interesting and exciting at the moment in Scotland as well is pubs. So for a long time, the on-trade industry's kind of declined a little bit, and lots of pubs closing, but I'm finding more recently there's lots of really special places opening as well. So a little example, there's Vault City Brewing. Vault City Brewing make a beer that was inspired by Scotland's national drink, Iron Brew. It became a bit of a cult following at Scottish Summit last year, where it was the only beer that was on tap in the particular hotel we were all in, and there must have been about 200 pints of it drank. And it's really interesting because the company who make them is smaller than the number of people who were drinking that beer that night. And there's lots of
Yeah.
these kind of niche microbreweries popping up all over Scotland as well, and little pubs that they call tap rooms. I'm not sure if that's a thing in America, but it's basically a really, really small pub that has about 5 or 6 different beers in it. And they're a different kind of atmosphere from a full-blown night out. I'm getting old now, I'm nearly 40, and I'm too old for drinking with 18 and 19-year-olds now. But it's nice to be in a pub with like 8 seats and be able to have a conversation and drink really nice beer, as opposed to a room full of 20-year-olds drinking all the beer and having no conversation whatsoever.
Yeah, man, that's super cool. You're also, I see the background there. You're a Lego fan, and which gives you
Yeah,
something, a fun hobby to share
just a bit,
with your
yeah.
son as well. I mean, I guess I gotta ask, is that whole cabinet full of Legos? But or just the
So
Legos
this
on
one
top
here,
there? Or?
there's the ones on the top. The top drawer has a few things in it. The bottom 2 drawers are full. There's some more over here. There's a cupboard over here that's entirely full. There's this little guy here.
There we go. Yeah.
We've got a Back to the Future car over here. Bunch of Star Wars stuff, and my little boy's room is literally overflowing with Lego as well. It's it's something I've really loved since I was about 4 or 5, and it's really nice to kind of share that with my son as well. Um, he really does baffle me at times though. We bought the Natural History Museum last year, and we read a bunch of reviews and things like that, and it's like 18 plus set, particularly challenging, particularly complicated, takes ages. And he was 6 at the time and did about 90% of it over about 3 days. And it's like, wait a minute, this is not right. This is supposed to be difficult. And he's like, look, Dad, it's done. So it's been interesting to see him really challenging himself. And although it's a small thing, that confidence boost for him going, I'm not supposed to be able to do this, but I've just done it. And I think that's something we see a lot in the kind of power platform space as well. A lot of businesses still think power platform is a toy, and it's for building apps for booking holidays and for little small things that aren't that big and that exciting. And then every so often someone will do something crazy like build the largest online testing platform in the world with 3.5 million customer interactions a year and 20,000 users a month. And it starts getting taken seriously. So it's cool to see my little boy, as I say, take that step back and go, yeah, I'm not supposed to do this, but I just did. I think
Yeah,
that's my
that's
favourite
awesome.
thing with building Lego with my son.
That's a super heartwarming and perfect way to wrap up this conversation, man. Stuart, thank you so much for being here. If people were listening to this conversation and were positively impacted by it and wanted to get in contact with you, what would be the best way to reach you or to connect with you?
So if you happen to be in Scotland on the last Tuesday of any month, you'll find me at Scottish Power Platform User Group in Glasgow. And you can also catch me on LinkedIn. Not as active as I used to be on there, but I'm quite receptive to messages and things. And I love to meet new people as well. So if you have a question for me or just want to reach out and just connect, by all means, find me on LinkedIn and I'd be more than happy to connect. Thank you very much for having me along.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for being here. I'll be absolutely sure to have a link to your LinkedIn down in the description down below so that people can get in direct contact with you, man. Once again, thank you so much for being here, connecting with different people and making new friends and picking their brains is my favorite part of doing this. And thank you to you for sticking to the end of the episode. My name is Griffin Lickfeld, the host of the Citizen Developer channel and Power Talks podcast, and I'm excited to connect with you in the next one.